Welcome to Ride Recoded, a Mind Diva podcast with Jessica Macris, where champions are made in the mind before they're made in the arena. Discover how to rewire limiting beliefs, harness the power of visualization, and align your mind, body, and horse for peak performance. This is your path to conscious transformation in and out of the saddle. Here's your host, Jessica Macris.
Hello, and welcome to Ride Recoded, a Mind Diva series here for the Equus Television Network. My name is Jessica Macris, and I'm the creator here at Mind Diva. I'm a clinical hypnotist and consciousness coach. I specialize in equine sports performance, where I help riders learn how to master their mind so they can master their ride. And these powerful methods are the secret sauce of optimal performance and in creating the life of your dreams. I have a wonderful guest today. His name is Joe Burns, a graduate and instructor at HMI, College of Hypnotherapy, who was also my mentor and savior through my schooling. Joe, I'm so glad you're here today. Thank you so much for being with us. You are a highly sought out public speaker. You have motivated and trained hundreds of thousands of attendees in your seminars and workshops worldwide and been featured in keynote for major corporations and brokerage houses. You have changed so many lives and you have such a beautiful mind. Please share your journey and becoming the hypnotist and coach that you are today and the way that you found the success that you.
Thank you, Jess. It's awesome being here with you. And, obviously we know each other pretty well and have worked together. Yeah, and I don't even know how much of this story you know, but, I started out, my first, one of the tools that you and I are attracted to is neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And I had my first exposure to that when I was 17. I was a high school football player, played a couple other sports, but that was kind of my main sport. And I wanted to play in college, and I was a good high school player, but not the biggest guy. And so I wasn't getting recruited by the big schools. And I took on the challenge, and I wanted to play at Division I level, so I walked on. And this first workshop that I went to, I didn't know that it was an NLP workshop, but they really were teaching techniques all about kind of using your subconscious mind and your programming and kind of programming in success as you program in an identity around success. And lo and behold, I went to Villanova. I played at the Division I level. I played over guys that were just far better and far more talented than me by using these techniques. And it really began my journey in this obsession with performance and, what makes two, let's say, really equally talented people or somebody less talented be able to outperform. And really using the mind and the mind-body connection, because that's really what we're doing for folks, right? And that's, as you talk about working with riders and everything, you're talking mind, body, and also the connection with the horse as well, and the communication skills with that. And there's this great speech by Steve Jobs when he gave the commencement speech at Stanford, and he talks about, the dots connecting, but they don't connect in the moment. And, I came to LA to be an actor and I, for a while I thought that was kind of wasted time, but I met this amazing instructor that really taught me kind of how to perform and be on stage. And he introduced me to Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and imagery, something I use a lot with my athletes and my executives. And then I kind of by accident fell into the stock market. But I ended up at this place, Investors Business Daily, where I had this amazing mentor, this older gentleman who's since passed, one of the greatest traders of all time, a self-made billionaire. And he taught me all these things that I thought, the stock market would have been wasted time in doing all this. But, one of the things that you and I have worked on in the past, and we work on with our athletes is he would tell me, the only way to get right when you're wrong is just get right away. Don't beat yourself up over it. Learn from it and take the lessons from it, but you've got to have your mindset ready for the next in the stock market trade and in life for the next situation. So for our athletes, especially, you got to be ready for the next play or the next ride or the next, game or, and so that really helped me. And I work on that a lot, especially in relationship stuff with people, right? Is this idea of not staying in bad trades and moving into, getting right away, but also
there.
Yes. I don't know how deep you want to go into that.
For another time.
But yeah. And so, those dots all kind of connected. And as I got burned out on working with the traders, because you and I always were really attracted to this saying, it's not mine, but, the greats that kind of come before us in this always talk about, we don't get what we want. We get who we are. And
Absolutely.
we'll go deeper into this, I'm sure, but what we want is our conscious mind. And that's where everybody tries to create change, is that conscious mind, but that's about 5% of the game, maybe 12% at most.
Right.
And who we are is our subconscious programming. It is our identity. It is, and it's where we'll revert back to all the time. And what I would see in traders is they would want success. They'd have rules. We would teach them these really strong rules. If they followed them, they would have success. But they would get their ego involved and they'd become little gamblers and they would always revert back to kind of who they were. And the thing about the stock market is it will expose who you are. I always used to joke back then, you don't need a therapist. Just look at your bank statement, look at your trading statement, and you're going to see your weaknesses right there. But I wasn't seeing people make those changes. And so I wanted to move out of working just with traders. I wanted to work with athletes and artists and executives, and that's really what I do now. And I went back to school, the school that you also attended, that I'm an instructor at, and that was really performative, really transformative, excuse me, in helping people with performance. And that was about 9 years ago now, 8, 9 years ago now. And the other thing that Jobs talks about in that commencement speech is you got to do what you love. And I found, really my purpose. I call my business the Mind on Purpose. And I really found my passion for this and helping others to get the change that they really want and to have the lives and to create the lives that they really want. So that's really kind of brought me to where I am today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a beautiful story. You talk about the mind being, 5% conscious. Elaborate on that a little bit. I don't think a lot of our listeners really truly understand the inner workings of the mind and how it ticks and why it ticks the way that it does. Can you elaborate a little bit more on our understanding of, the theory of the mind and give our listeners a little bit more of an in-depth understanding on that?
Yeah, this was a big aha moment for me,
Yeah.
and when I share this with people, and I hope, our listeners have a similar experience, but I was like, why didn't they teach us this in school?
I know.
And
Yeah.
and really, we know now why is because they're trying to create worker bees, not free thinkers in school.
Right.
But understanding how the mind works, I think, is a really big moment for everybody that I work
The
with. And
secret sauce.
it as I love the way you presented that in the very beginning. Yeah, yeah, it's the secret sauce. And so, um, so we have really the same hardware, the same kind of brain and mind as our hunter-gatherer ancestors from years ago. So we're born with real primitive instincts, fight, flight, freeze, right? Also, there's one that we kind of work on. There's the procreative one too. Don't know how much we'll talk about that today, but procreating survival is not just about us surviving, but our genes surviving, and that's very primal. And then fawn, like we evolved to be in tribes of 150 people, not in big cities and that sort of thing. And we intrinsically knew that if we got kicked out of our tribe, we weren't going to survive very long. And so all of these primitives are set up for survival. And what happens though is all this modern software that we put in there, social media and being in big cities and all of these types of things will kind of play on this idea of how we deal with threat. And so basically from 0 to about 8, 9, we are constantly in hypnosis. And I think one of the things we can talk about today is what hypnosis is, what it isn't, kind of the misconception behind it, right? But it's a learning state. And really what we talk about, at the school and in this work is what we're suggestible to. And when we're 0 to 9, we're hyper suggestible to everything. We have imaginary friends and have tea parties with our stuffed animals. And, we believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and all of those types of things. And we take everything in as truth. And that's how our subconscious mind works. It takes everything in as true. It doesn't filter or factor it out. And what happens is we have these known associations that we learn and we really associate them with safe. And we can go deeper into this if you want. But then about 8 or 9, we develop that little critical mind, right? And we know because we both have kids, that's right when they start asking about Santa Claus and, you say, go to bed at this time. Why? Eat your vegetables. Why? We start to kind of critique the world. And that critical mind, or what Freud would probably call the ego, they're similar, not maybe identical, but that's there to kind of protect the subconscious mind. So we're not taking everything in as associated. And so now what happens is we still develop that programming, and really where we get that programming from is authority figures, our parents, teachers, religious leaders, older kids, people that we feel are in a position of authority. And that will continue throughout life, but that large base is done largely to us, at that point. And then what happens is we want something, right? We want to make a change. And, let's say somebody says, oh, I want to, I want to lose weight, for example. And, their mom, every time they were down or whatever, gave them chocolate cake. And so their association is that certain comfort foods are not only comfortable, but they feel very safe. And so that change they want to make of working out and eating differently and eating right goes to that critical mind, and it acts like a little bouncer. And what it does is it basically kind of kicks it out if it doesn't fit who we are. And so that's where all of our clients, get so out of alignment, like all of us get out of alignment. We want these things, but if it doesn't feel familiar to us or safe, and they can be very at odds. Let's say, you work with a woman that has been in an abusive relationship, and she says she wants a loving relationship. But if she doesn't change out those known associations, she's actually equating the abusive relationship, let's say, with safe, even though it's far from safe. It's anything but safe.
It's familiar.
It's familiar. And so we'll move toward the devil that we know and away from the angel that we want every time. And we can get a little deeper into the neurochemistry and a little deeper into kind of
the brain, how the brain is attracted more to familiarity, whether it's positive or negative, because what is known to the mind is safe.
Yeah. And I always tell that story.
Yeah. Well, and 90% of our operating system is that subconscious mind before the critical mind. I mean, that's hard to rewire.
It's hard to rewire. And again, people come at it thinking that willpower will work. And everybody that's tried to make a change know that willpower, it'll only take you so far. Or you can maybe, if you're really successful doing that, you can use willpower up to a certain point where 30 days it becomes a habit and you repeat it. Because that's how we learn, right? Repetition and association. But the more powerful the association, the less we have to repeat it. So if you think about it, and again, that conscious mind, you can tell a little kid, when that stove is orange, don't touch it. But then they see the brownies up there, being warmed and everything, and they go up and that's orange and they touch it, and now they have that pain and they have that experience, and they only really need that once. You can tell them a million times, but that one powerful association wires that in there. Don't touch the stove when it's orange. And that can be a painful experience, it can be a pleasurable experience, but the more powerful that association. So what we're doing in hypnosis is we're giving them a very powerful, we get them in a relaxed, very suggestible state, so that once they're in that relaxed, suggestible state, we get past that critical mind. And once we get past that critical mind, we can go in there and create powerful new associations that help, let's say, a rider or an athlete to get what they want and who they are in alignment. We're reprogramming that subconscious mind.
So going back to the brownies on the stove, our minds are not just programmed between 8 and 9. We are taking all that in as truth. But then as we grow up and we develop, moments in our life, like touching the stove and having this big, powerful moment, those will go directly through the critical mind and seep into the subconscious, like maybe a harsh fall or
Yes.
a bad spook or something kind of traumatic. Those also are able to bypass the critical mind and deep dive and sit right into the subconscious. And this creates problems for our athletes, not only just in riding, but athletes on the field or at the plate or whatever it needs to be, a traumatic moment, getting hit with the ball or getting, tackled the wrong way. These things also are able to bypass the same way that we can bypass hypnotically. Correct?
I love that example because I think that I work with that all the time. I have a young basketball player right now that's coming off an injury, and his coach shared and his dad shared that he's not as aggressive driving to the basket, and I work with athletes all the time on coming off of injuries and that sort of thing, and trusting it. It's one of the biggest things they talk about, coming off an injury or a fall. Both my sisters were champion riders, and I can remember there was this one girl that was like, just dominating the division, and then she had a really bad fall and broke her pelvis, and her journey back from that, even when I was young, seeing that and seeing what she struggled through. And it's just that idea of trusting, because it's not like we don't want to drive to the basket as aggressive or get right back on the horse and get into that, but that powerful association is creating a fear that will come out in how that automatically represents or presents for that rider. And so it's really getting them back and reassociating what they love about it, reassociating powerfully, and getting back in and being able to, on a subconscious level, not just what they want, but on that subconscious level, being able to trust. And I love, one of the examples that you and I have talked about in the past is this idea of the rider kind of being the conscious and the horse being so powerful, and it's got to be the subconscious. But you are not just training riders, right? The riders are training the horses over and over and over again to respond to the crop and respond to the where the hand positioning is. And I don't know your sport like you do, but we don't need to know somebody's sport to help them with their sport as much as really helping them to understand that powerful subconscious mind. And so if that horse, for example, is spooked, I would imagine you would walk it out to the middle of the paddock, and calm it down and calm it down and calm it down. Because if it's seeing snakes everywhere, right? If it's seeing a snake every time the wind blows, it's going to be skittish. And that's kind of what the subconscious mind is doing when that powerful association of being injured or fall or something like that. And so it's the conscious mind, but getting it in there and just retraining it. And there's real powerful techniques besides the hypnosis that we work on with the conscious mind. Conscious breathing, one of the big things for my athletes. So one of the things that we talk about in Theory of Mind is that story that I like to tell, right? If you and I are hunter-gatherers and we're out there and we're trying to hunt, trying to gather, and, instead of seeing food, we see a tiger, right? Or we see a tiger print, more importantly. So let's say we see a tiger print. It's fresh, that tiger's around. And so that reticular activating system, that part of our brain that deals with what we focus on, it's not going to be focused on hunting anymore. It's going to focus on not being hunted by the tiger, and it's going to see through that lens. So if the wind is moving the bush over there, we're not thinking, oh, that's just the wind. We're thinking that's a tiger, and we start to go into that fight, flight, freeze. And so what an athlete that's going through recovering from a fall or maybe a couple of falls in that association is, they're starting to see everything through that lens of survival and preservation and that threat. And this can happen, not many tigers.
The law of perceived reality.
Yeah, and you and I were just talking about a book that you're reading right now. It's so powerful, right? Is you're going to view it through that lens. And so we've got to get that athlete not viewing their current situation through the lens of the fall. We would rewire in all of the successes they've had. We rewire in all of the times when this was fun. We would rewire in all the times when this remind them of how much they love this. And that now, and in the subconscious mind, the more powerful state is going to always win out. And so we want to get them into the hypnosis, or, like I said, also give them some techniques so that they're starting to breathe. So if we saw a tiger, we'd breathe like there's a tiger. And that's very upregulating. That's very stressful, right? And cortisol would be charging through our system. Adrenaline would be charging through our system. Our blood is moving to our arms and our legs so we can fight the tiger, imaginary or not. It's not moving to our rest and digest. It's not moving to our creative, right? You and I aren't thinking of doing a cave painting of the tiger. We're just thinking about how not to be eaten by the tiger. Now, in modern times when we don't see many tigers, now again, an athlete dealing with an injury or fall is there's a physical threat there that maybe...
Well, it's important too, and to get them to understand and educate how the brain is designed to predict and protect. So when there has been a big, powerful association that has sunk into the subconscious mind, the brain is going to scan for that each and every time. It's
seeing everything, as you said, through that perceived threat, right? So if that bush is moving, it could very well be the wind. It could very well be, a friend coming out of the bushes. Yeah. But it's going to be viewed as that tiger, as that threat. Now, here's the thing, is that along with the perceived physical threat that a rider or an athlete coming off injury would have, there's also the threat really to our identity. And that's either who we are or who we want to be. And so as that person starts to... Or who we think we are, right? Or who we really want to be. So let's say a rider wants to be a champion rider, wants to do their best, wants to do that. And the minute they start to feel that hesitation also starts to feel like a threat to maybe that old me as a rider, or that best me, or that... And so what we're doing is retraining that suggestible subconscious mind, getting access to it, but also helping them breathe like there's no threat. And that's the cool thing about the breath. So a lot of athletes really find breath awareness and breathing, long, slow exhales, dropping in, box breathing. There's some things that we can help, because what that's doing is it's telling the subconscious, it's telling the body where we hold the subconscious, you're safe, there's no tiger. And as the minute you start breathing that way, now you're able to be resourced. And that's constantly what we're trying to get an athlete or any individual, an executive, is resourced as opposed to in survival mode.
And I wish so deeply that I had these tools and techniques when I was younger. And, looking back now, it's a beautiful thing that I didn't, because I had to turn my pain into power, and now I'm here and I'm able to help so many people change their lives. But I remember an old trainer telling me that I was the queen of disaster, and it did become my identity, talking about that. And it became this version, and I didn't want to be that person, but she utilized my fears and utilized, those parts of me that were scared. And it happened after a really bad fall where I, broke my leg in half off a baby horse. And after that, she kept me small and she kept me scared. And the queen of disaster became my identity. And my reality matched the queen of disaster, to where little things that would just go wrong, that would not make any sense. And it took me years and years to understand how I was not only creating this through this belief system that I've adopted through my authority figure, who has shaped me, yeah. Right? At a young age. I was only 16 at the time. So, not young, but I was still very suggestible. And I saw her as a second parental figure, essentially.
Sure.
And it's just interesting how you morph yourself into this identity, even if it's not what you want. It's not in alignment, and things don't feel right. And when that's going wrong all the time, it really makes you sit down and go, okay, what do I need to change here?
Yeah, and so, boy, you just opened up so many wonderful doors. First, let's deal with this, because I'm sure you're not just dealing with riders here. You're dealing with trainers and other people and parents, right?
So many of my clients, so many of my riders come to me, and there's a lot of trainer trauma going on. There's a lot of higher ups talking down or shaping young minds, or even adults, and it's really affecting them. And they're able to have these powerful association moments, and a trainer's little 2 words, 3 words, it'll drop right past that critical mind, and it will become a new belief. And it is so hindering and so damaging. And I really want people to know that there's freedom.
And sometimes it can be one powerful association, right? It can be that one person in authority that tells you something and you accept it as true. And all of a sudden, as you said, that becomes your reality. So I think it's really important for parents, especially, there's the classic little league parent, and, where they're pushing somebody and where they're, but trainers, they have the best of intention, right? They want to get the best out of their athletes. And I think helping them to understand, that's really powerful. And when you label somebody like that, they start to take that on as their identity. They take that on from that authority figure, and they will start to, we can use kind of a big woo word like manifest or create, these situations. And we do that on a subconscious level. And so one of the big things that we're working on, not just with athletes, but individuals, is being the cause, right? Not the effect, waiting around for good things to happen, to feel good. It's like, no, and Tony Robbins, who's a big NLP guy, probably name most people know, he has this thing called state story strategy. And so what we're doing in the hypnosis, or what we're doing with our athletes in giving them preparation methods, the breathing, like I said, is getting them in state first, right? And so when you're talking about this idea of you don't get what you want, you get who you are, and your identity is, you'll start to notice that reticular activating system. So one of the things that we want to start doing, for example, I call these the Philosopher's Stone questions. These are my 4 questions. And Philosopher's Stone, back in the day, alchemists supposedly were always looking for the Philosopher's Stone because it would help them to turn toxic metals like lead into precious metals like gold. So if we're doing this for an athlete, what are we trying to do is, did this happen to you, or did this happen for you? Mm-hmm. And so the power of questions is so important in kind of shaking up that identity. And so the first question is this story true? So even if it's an authority figure, a trainer, or somebody telling you this, or your own mind telling you this, is this story true? Is that, a lot of times the stories that we get locked in and tell ourselves, or that perceived reality that we're talking about, it's not even true, right? We know it's not even true.
But before we carry on with that, how would someone that really doesn't have this relationship with their mind, that really doesn't understand that most of the thoughts that they're thinking are not their own, how do we get those people to even get to a point to ask these questions of, is it true, right? Because if you're not understanding that your mind and your thoughts are not always your own, then how do we get them to understand, to even ask the question, oh, is this true? Does that make sense?
Yeah, really good question. So I can remember back, for me, So there's this idea of our remembered past and then our very predictable future. And so a remembered past is viewed through the lens of success or failure, those associations. So went to Catholic school, right? We had these two rivals, South Catholic, East Catholic. And in the South Catholic game, I was unstoppable. Like ran for, almost 300 yards and passed for the winning touchdown and everything. And then the East Catholic game, I was very stoppable. I was the reason we lost the game. I probably ran for minus 73 yards, fumbled three times. It was just horrible, right? But when I view the past, when I look at the South Catholic game, I only remember the good plays. There were bad plays, right? And vice versa, when I remember the East Catholic game, because I'm viewing it through the lens of the success or the failure. And now, if we don't start to shake up that lens, then our future becomes very, very predictable because we'll just keep repeating those patterns. So we can do that in hypnosis, right? But helping somebody to understand, how are we as humans, as witnesses? We're horrible witnesses. Let's say you and I saw a crime, because we're in fight, flight, freeze. And so we're not seeing things clearly, right? Our vision isn't even
Through the lens of our own perceived reality.
our
And
own
we
perceived
feel so
reality. And so you might say, oh, the perpetrator was this, and describe him very differently than me because of your own kind of perceptions and prejudges. I don't mean prejudices, but I mean, in some racist form, I mean in your lens, as people say, your view of the world, your worldview, and my worldview are going to be different, especially under stressors. And so what we want to start to do is consciously shake those up. And that's why those questions, right? Is this story true in the first place, right? And just helping them to understand, because a lot of times we know that story that we're telling ourselves isn't true. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is true, right? That trainer said that to you, right?
Yeah.
Now, was that serving you? No. Right? Was it serving you? No, it was creating an identity and association that wasn't serving you. Okay. And it's never serving our clients, or they wouldn't be working with us. And that's all I have to remind them of, right? If it was serving you, this story, even if it's true, she said that to you, that's true, right? Is it serving you? No, because you know that it didn't help you. And so now we want to start moving from the perceived threat to possible solutions. So what are all the other things that could be true? There's a trillion infinite things that both good and bad that could be true. But now we're starting to move into other possibilities. We're starting to shake up this is what is true to us that our subconscious mind is doing, right? And then finally, what's the gift in this? Because what those questions, or any good questions, are directing that reticular activating system, what we focus on, what we prioritize. So if you ask yourself lousy questions consciously, and athletes do this all the time, especially executive, and people do this all the time, right? Why has this always happened to me?
Right.
That's a horrible question, because now your subconscious mind, which is designed to give you an answer and designed to give you meaning, is going back and going, well, Jessica, do you want from 6 days ago, 6 hours ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago?
A lot of my riders will come to me and be like, I really struggle with like green jumps. And so they have this whole story around green jumps. And it could be the most simple, easy, the most nicest track to the green jump, and they will eat it every time. And it's just this reality based off of creation.
Yeah. And so if they're asking themselves, why do I have problems with green jumps? Their mind is quickly going through their lived experience and giving them all the evidence of the times when they had problems with that, right?
Absolutely.
When they go, what's the gift in this? Mm-hmm. It's not so important even that they have the answer right away. Right? Our mind wants an answer, but now that reticular activating system is looking for the gift. It's going, well, maybe this or maybe that. And then what happens, like those dots connecting, is all of a sudden something happens, a little breakthrough happens, a new association, and they go, oh, that's the gift in this, right? And what we're talking about here is that homeostasis. And that works great for survival, but not for growth and not for thrival. It's trying to keep us the same. It's called the comfort zone. I don't think it's very comfortable for most of our athletes. It's really a survival zone. And so consciously getting them to shake that up first. And then what it is what's the story that we want to be telling? The number one word that I hear from clients, from athletes, is stuck. Mm-hmm. Right. And athletes get this all the time when they're stuck after a fall. They're stuck with the green jumps. They're stuck. It's like, so, okay, how do we get them unstuck? It's like, okay, what do you want this to feel like? And so now as we're creating the new identity and the new associations for them on a subconscious level, right? Now their reticular activating system is looking at all of these things. So it's a real simple question. A lot of the psychiatrists say, you have one important question to ask. Are you living in a friendly world or an unfriendly world? And I say, is these things happening for you or to you? And eventually, as you really become masterful as athletes, the greats are, it's going to happen through me. I know when the pressure's on, game time's on. I know when it's time and that clock goes off, and I've got all these jumps in front of me, I'm my best version of me, bring it on. And that's the identity that we want to create with our athletes. But it's got to be shaking up the old story that they're stuck in and helping them to create a new story, so that what you said is so important. As that identity, right, the queen of disaster, you are finding, your reticular activating system is finding all the little opportunities on a subconscious level
What we
for
think
disaster
about
to strike.
expands. What we focus on expands, and this could work in our favor and completely against us. And so many people and athletes and even non-athletes are functioning without this knowledge, without understanding this, and they're hyper fixating on these little simple things, and are having these repetitive issues come up and obstacles. And if we can just give them this code of, hey, there's this different path we can take if we just create a few new synapses in the brain, and we can rewire everything around. And we do such brilliant work rewiring through the process of reframing, and you do reframing so brilliantly. So would you touch on that?
Yeah, and those questions are an example of a reframe.
Exactly.
But it's really, how do we move from this happened to me to it happened for me? And so the example then is, when you start to ask what's the gift, now you're looking, your reticular activating system is starting to, instead of the queen of disaster, right? If this me, right, the queen of opportunity, what is that identity that she would want to create? And so now, as we frame everything as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to change, to get better, right? We always say in NLP, there is one of my ultimate favorite reframes is, there's no failure. There's just feedback.
Yeah.
Right? You know it. And once we start to embrace that as kind of a fundamental reframe, that's how we learn, right? You don't learn by getting lucky once and doing it right once. You repeat it and associate it, repeat it and associate it. But that comes with lots of tripping on the green fences beforehand. And so as you start to go, oh, all of this was just feedback that's getting me not only to the green fences, but the bigger fences after the green, or whatever. Are the green fences the biggest fences? I don't even know, right? But it's getting us, it's moving up, right? And I always use this example. If you and I were going to hike up Mount Everest, even if we trained at altitude for a year, we're not going to go traipsing straight up there. Like, the altitude gets higher and higher and higher with success. And this is so key for athletes. We'd go up to base camp 1. We'd spend 3 weeks there. We'd acclimate to the success of the climb. Our lungs would acclimate to the thinner air. And then we'd set off and trudge up to base camp 2 and base camp 3. And then finally with Mount Everest, it would be, is the weather right to ascend? The cool thing in life, or with our athletes, there's no ultimate ascension. They keep growing and keep learning. And that imposter is there at every level trying to keep you small. That imposter, that critical mind, is 8 years old. That's when we develop it. And she or he is sitting on your shoulder trying to keep you small. And that's when we want to also help them to get in a relationship with it. Oh, you're not going to make it over the green fences. Thank you. But I got this, right? But what we want to do is get in conflict with it, right? Let's say your 8-year-old self, you don't want to punch your 8-year-old self. You want to say thank you, right? But if your 8-year-old self gave you advice, you might go, okay, thank you.
Cute.
It's cute. I love that, right? That's a really good reframe, right? Isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? And so when you say, isn't that cute, you kind of taken all the power of the charge away from it. And now you're moving back into that resource place of just saying, hey, these are just base camps. And whenever my imposter crops up, and here's the bad news, he or she doesn't go away, right? That 8-year-old on your shoulder, that little Jessica, doesn't go away. So as your podcast takes off and you guys have all this success with this, and at the next level, they're going to be right there trying to keep you in that level of homeostasis, that safe level, familiar level. And as we help our athletes to embrace not failure, but that feedback, right? Now it doesn't become something happening to us. It becomes something really happening for us and our growth. And we realize that that's how we grow, right? We both have kids. Remember back then when they were learning to walk, right? they would stumble and stumble and stumble, and they never at any point in their innocence went, maybe walking's not for me. They just kept doing it until they got their balance and they got their trying and they got the feedback, right? They're getting the balance feedback, they're getting all that. That's how we learn, is falling down to walk. And so helping people know that's part of the learning process, not an impediment to the learning process, not an impediment to the growth process or the success process. It's part of the process,
Such a
right?
beautiful tool. Such a beautiful tool. And for those that are not familiar with, that 8-year-old voice, that critical mind, and they're accepting all these thoughts as truth, what do you say to your athlete clients or just clients in general on how to identify that and how to separate from it?
Good. So one of the things we obviously do a lot in the hypnotic process to get into the subconscious mind, one of the things that I talk about with my athletes is mental reps, right? Getting in your mental reps. For young athletes, it could be watching like a rider they really admire going over things, their form. I have a young diver that I work with, and he watches that. We have him watching all of the greats, the Greg Louganis and that, and like, where's their position on the board? Where's their position? Because what they're seeing is excellence, right? And visualizing it and rewiring it. So we get them and teach them how to get into some state themselves, do some breathing, do some light, get into that alpha. And then this idea of mental reps is so important, because how many of your listeners have good trainers? They understand nutrition, having a good horse,
Right.
so at the competitive level, that all gets tighter and tighter and tighter, right? They all have. So, when I went back and worked with, a football team just recently, I said, y'all have great coaches.
Right.
Y'all have great trainers. Y'all have great nutrition. You all do the same lifting, and you're getting about the same amount of practice time. The NCAA tells you how much practice time you can have. How many people are going home and doing their mental reps for at least a half hour every night? And there's all these great studies. This has been repeated over and over and over again. They take a bunch of students, not athletes, they're not basketball players, and they have one group do free throws, practice an hour a day for a month. The other group does nothing, and then the third group just mentally practices. And they see this I'm going to kind of tell two stories here, but classic pianists, they put fMRIs on their brain and they have them go through and then they have others just sit there with the fMRI and they just think about playing. And the same parts of the brain are wiring up, and our mind doesn't know the difference between really powerfully imagined experience, a dream, right? We've all had those dreams where we wake up and it may be a great dream and you wish you went back to sleep, or it's a nightmare and you're panicked, or you have that fight flight response. Our mind, our subconscious, doesn't know the difference. And so if you're doing those mental reps, but what happened in that's been repeated over and over again with the free throws is the group that practiced had about a 26% increase. I think it was 27%. The group that just did mental practice and never touched a basketball was within 1% of that. Of course, the group that did nothing. And so what I would say is, if you're doing both, if you're doing your physical practices and you're getting in your time on your horse and you're getting your time with your trainer and everything, and then doing that mental practice, because one favorite thing I always like to ask, like, for example, this basketball player, when you're picturing shooting a shot, do you ever miss? Right? Because we always say it's not just practice that is going to make you perfect. It's perfect practice. And in our mind, we can be doing that perfect practice where we're never missing. We're never stumbling over the green, the green rails, we're the green jumps. We can practice that in our mind over and over and over again and get that association deep in as we are visualizing. And so as we're doing that, we are then also creating this new identity of these green, oh, that's what we do. We jump over green rails. We jump over green jumps. And the mental practice for an athlete is so important, because it's going to separate them from those that are not doing that. And most people are not doing that.
And how would you put into terms for someone that's kind of new to these concepts on how, when we do these deep visualizations and we're training our brain to accept and adopt new ideas as truth, how would you get them to understand the concept of how what we think about brings about?
Good. So what we're really doing is training the body, because the body is the subconscious mind. And so what's important is not just the visualization, it's the feeling that is associating that, right?
That's
And
what you
so
would call state.
state, right? And so getting in state and then really associating what would it feel like? And then you can take it to what's going to feel like to stand on the podium and have the trophy, have the prize, get in that feeling of it, and getting in kind of the feeling of the end game that we want. And what this is doing is being that cause, not waiting around for it to happen to feel that good, right? Because why do we want anything in life? Let's say somebody wants a red Ferrari, I don't judge whether they want a red Ferrari or a trophy or a first place or a medal, right? That's important to them. Okay, great. But what they really want is the feeling that it's going to give them. And so what we're really associating is that powerful feeling. So I want to find out why that person wants that red Ferrari. Oh, maybe they like red cars. Maybe they like things that go fast. Maybe it's a status thing. Maybe it's just something that would make them feel like they made it. Okay, what would that feel like? So if we're putting that into the hypnosis, or we're having them do the visualizations, what we want to do is get that conscious mind, the rider, the conscious mind, right? That is controlling, because the rider's giving the subconscious. And Jung has this great quote: until you make the unconscious conscious. In other words, until you get your subconscious in line with what you want. So first it's, what do you want? Why do you want it? And there's a great saying also, if you have a powerful enough why, you'll figure out the how. But most people get stuck in that strategy, and that strategy is something new, and we don't like new things, our subconscious mind, right? We think we do, but we don't. And so we've got to get in that state, reframe and change the story, and then let the strategy flow from that. So when we're doing the hypnosis, I want to know, Jessica, how do you want to feel? How would it feel to have this thing that you want? What would it feel like to go over the green rail? What would it feel like just as you're going over that? Explain it to me, get it. So give me the conscious language, because we're linguists, we're mixing the language, the suggestibility with reprogramming that subconscious mind. So when they're doing their visualization, I want them doing the same thing on their own, training them how to get in state, how to get in the feeling of what they want as they're visualizing it. Because all the visualization in the world is only going to have so much unless you're really getting it associated. It's that powerful association. It's the feeling of touching the stove that associates. It's not me telling you that it's hot.
And to really solidify that association, we teach our clients to open up all five senses, to smell the smells, to hear the sounds, to see the things, to feel the feelings. And when you activate all five senses, that really is a sure track to bypass critical mind and secure a new known into the subconscious mind.
Yeah. So if you think about it really simply, and I love the way you put, what takes me, 10 paragraphs into something really simple. You're so good at that. It makes you such a great interviewer too. And so what we're talking about is experience, right? And so again, the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between an imagined or a real event. Andrew Huberman is a neuroscientist that we both have talked about. He's out of Stanford. He's got a great podcast just on the mind, and he's a big believer in breathwork and hypnosis, and he really goes through the science of it. But he says, you can be in Chicago at the top of like a, high story building, nowhere near the ocean, and really vividly imagine a shark attack, and your body is going through, or have a dream about a shark attack, and your body's going through that experience. You don't know the difference. You're wiring that in. You're wiring in all the. So if we get in that state, what are we talking about? Is giving our athletes an experience. What's the experience of getting over the green rail? What's the experience? And as we're giving them that experience, well, how do we have experiences in our world? We experience it through the five senses, right? What would success smell like? And we can even cross up those. Like, what would it taste like? What would it, and what would that feel like more than anything, to be on the other side of that rail? And aren't we trying to get all of our clients over an imaginary rail or a real rail, whether it's a green rail or whatever? Is what would it feel like to be on the other side of this? And as we're associating that powerful feeling through the senses, looking, smelling, seeing, touching, even I would say a sixth sense of just knowing, right? What would it feel like to know? Yeah, that sixth sense of just intuition and knowing. So now we're kind of building in a little bit more. And as you mentioned, now instead of the queen of disaster, we're creating the identity for success that they want. From that identity, everything's going to flow. And as we're creating that identity, their reticular activating system is now tuned to all of these little evidence, avenues, proof that they are who they think they are. Because Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so it's, how do we get this new identity from the queen of disaster to the queen of opportunity, for the queen of success, right? For, and as we're creating that new identity through the experience in the hypnotic process, through the visualization process. But this is why a lot of times also affirmations don't work for people. I'm not against affirmations, right? So what I also suggest to our clients is, in the morning, we're very hypnotic. We're coming out of sleep, right? So we're coming out of a kind of a delta wave brainwave. We're unconscious. Right now, you and I are in beta. And that is, we're aware, we're talking, we're interacting. Now, I would say if we got really into high beta, that's fight, flight, freeze. That's ultra aware. Like, that's where you're hyper suggestible, hyper aware. Not where we want our athletes, right? And that fight, flight, freeze. In between is alpha and theta. Alpha is kind of that daydreamy, you're driving your car, you miss your exit, or you drive your car, you get home, and you're like, wait, how did I get here, right? Because you're in that daydreamy kind of, the teacher calls on you in class, and you're like, I'm sorry, what? Theta is that state where we are in deep meditation or hypnosis. That is that learning state, right? So now what happens is, in the morning, as we're coming out of delta going into beta, we have that half hour where we're hyper suggestible. So doing things like gratitude, doing things like your visualization at that time, very powerful. Visualizing how you want your day, how you want your workout, how you want your practice to go, for example. That's when you want to do your affirmations. Because right now, in beta phase, with my critical mind sitting on my shoulder, if I go, Jessica, I'm 100 millionaire, right? My critical mind goes, no, you're not. Why you kid? Don't kid these people. Don't kid her, right? But when I'm in that alpha theta state and I feel abundant and I feel like that, and I could say, I'm 100 millionaire. It's on its way, right? It's on its way. I can feel that way. And now I'm looking for evidence of things coming in, right? Whereas, you and I were kind of joking right before we got on about, I got this little bomb right beforehand, and I got this little, and I said, me too. But look at us right now. We're not thinking about that because we're in flow, and we're now, our reticular activating system is in something that we love. We're moving. All that is just moving that focus, right? And so when we're hypersuggestible, now we have that same half hour the other direction. We're going from beta to sleep. We've got that half hour at night. I call it magic hour. Half hour in the morning, half hour at night. Now, when you're putting in affirmations, I am an amazing rider. I am somebody that, glides with ease over the green rails. I am, now that's getting much deeper, because that person, our client, ourselves, we are hyper suggestible. We're in a light form, if not a form, of hypnosis. They also want to avoid negativity at that time, right? They don't want to be reviewing what their coach called them the queen of disaster, or looking at, social media where they're comparing themselves to all these other people, right? But they could be doing their visualizations at that time. They could be watching people that are successful at what they're doing at that time, because that's actually getting much deeper. That critical mind is not as present at those moments. So that's another little technique that we would give people. It's not that I don't love affirmations, but just doing them for work. And again, it's like that, is the stove hot versus experiencing the stove.
Well, if you grew up in scarcity, and mom and dad were always, money doesn't grow on trees, you're going to adopt this belief system that money doesn't grow on trees, and you can tell yourself you're a millionaire over and over, but that critical mind is going to reject it each and every time.
You don't feel it, right? You can tell it to yourself.
We have to create in the subconscious a known of feeling as a millionaire, and that's how we start to attract.
Yeah, and now we're talking both nature and nurture, but our parents, they were programmed by their parents, and on and on and on. And so, what I find is, it gives me a lot more grace for our parents as we kind of understand this, right? But, the old studies, I don't know the exact numbers, but the amount of times we hear no, or don't go there, or don't do that, as opposed to yes, or you got this, or you're, and then we also watch the patterns of our parents, right? They might be telling us we can do anything, but we don't see them doing that. They might tell us we can be highly successful. We don't see them doing that. And it's like we're experiencing that through watching them more than hearing the stove is hot, or more than you can be successful, because we're also seeing the experience of it. And that's where our programming comes. And so what I really want people to understand more than anything, because I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our hour here together, but is, as you're programming up to this point, whenever you're watching this, it's not your fault. It was done to you, right? And it was done by those, but now as you start to learn and understand how the mind works, you get to take control of that. And so that's the one thing that I always tell people when they're new and they're coming into hypnosis is, I say, I bet you want me to tell you this is not mind control. And they go, yeah, because they're afraid that, we're going to make them cluck like a chicken or something they see on stage, which is not what we do, right? And I say, it is mind control, but not in the way you think. It's about giving you more control over your mind than you've ever had, so that now, yeah, now you can take control of that programming. So it's not your fault up to this point, but now once you know, now you get to decide what you want. And so as we're getting the conscious mind clear on what it wants, our athletes clear on what they want, now it's how do we help them to experience that through hypnosis, through their visualization, through all these other things in state. How do we help them reframe whatever that story is that they've been telling themselves into the story that they want? Is this happening to me or for me, and actually through me, right? And then we start to really kind of develop strategy, because again, that strategy is going to come from maybe experts in their sport or coaches or things like that. And now the strategy, they're going to be much more acceptable to getting to higher and higher jumps, higher and higher rails, because they've experienced the success in their mind, in reality as well. And they are creating from that place, like you were doing as the Queen of Disaster, and how you learn to transform that.
Now, that's so beautiful the way that you put that. And it's just so powerful how stepping into this space of empowerment gives you such an immense amount of freedom. But what would you say? So with the horses, we do have to understand that we are dealing with a second heart and a second mind of their own. And I always call it a dance between the two nervous systems, an energy exchange, a transference of your subconscious mind. In HMI, when we were going through school, I remember my first day, the instructor identified hypnosis as, or identified the subconscious mind as a horse. And it was just so fascinating to me. And, but at the end of the day, it's still an animal. And so sometimes my clients will come to me and say, I'm doing the work, I'm doing this thing, and I still have these obstacles come up. And there can be so many other reasons, like no turnout, or, the show prep was off, or, XYZ. But how do we really keep these athletes strong in those moments, in the face of these obstacles, when they're doing the work and they feel really strong and they feel like they're, really on the ball mentally, but something's still amiss? How do we keep them focused on the prize and not deterring back to those old programs and old habits of the I can'ts and those old stories that they used to tell themselves?
Well, you brought up something interesting I want to address first that I wasn't kind of even thinking we would cover. But you were mentioning, the horse being, a separate beast and another heartbeat. And we could talk about that as you were guiding us so deftly towards the conscious and the subconscious mind, and really into the present moment is what we're going to talk about. But this blew me away, right? Because you and I have talked so much about energy and being the cause, right? And, we can call it, the woo people call it more the law of attraction or vibration or anything. And I believe in that. I believe this is all energy. We're little bits of energy spinning around. We think we're solid, but we're energy. But if we just make it more scientific, when you're your best version of yourself, first off, you're present in the moment, and your energy is high, your energy is confident, your energy is this. Now, when we're talking about an animal, so we both are dog people as much as, I grew up around horses, and you obviously are a horse person. But I have this velociraptor of a German Shepherd, that when I take on walks, he just goes, and it's constantly this tugging, pulling. And it hit me, Joe, you teach this stuff about minding your own energy. And a couple months ago, as I was teaching this in a group, I went, and it like went off like a light bulb. I wasn't practicing what I preached when I'm with him, right? And so that horse feels that energy, that confidence, that flow, and it's going to respond to all of that training when that rider is confident. And so now when I walk him, we get these two little wiener dogs 2 doors down, and the minute we go by, they go to the den. And I used to be like, no, and my energy was adding and fueling to his lack of training that I should have given a lot more of, right? But now it's just like, I go out with that intention before I walk him. And I do this when I go into my groups, I do this when I'm with my athletes. And so now I started doing it with him, and I started doing it more intentionally. If I'm going into a party, I'm going into a social event, I'm going in, I want to mind my energy, set my intention, set what that is. And for our athletes, this is so important. It's called getting your game face on, or getting, that preparation beforehand. And so I do that now in my dog. And I would say 90% of the problems have just gone away because I'm calm and I'm that best friend. I don't just wander out on walks. I set that intention. And so certainly for a rider with another heartbeat down there, your energy is everything. But that's going to be the same with other people. That's going to be the same in your relationships, is your energy is going to be magnetic and attractive. And when you're that version of you, your most resource, your blood is going to your creative, not to your arms and legs so you can fight off an imaginary threat, right? Because again, if we saw the tiger, we're either going to fight it, arms, blood's going to literally our blood, and all those kind of survival neurochemicals are going through our system. Whereas when we're in flow and we are being that person of influence and we're resourced, we got that dopamine, we got that serotonin, we got that oxytocin, those really, really feel good chemicals, and that animal is going to feel it. Now, back to the question that you said, just for that person, how do they get there? You can't go into the remembered past. You can't go into the predictable future. The example I always use, and I would imagine a lot of our listeners are old enough to remember Blockbuster, right? But if you're going to use the past or the future, it's got to be a compelling. Best is bring yourself in the present moment. Focus on your breath until you just get in the moment. Count your breathing until you realize you're just in that moment. And then if you want to pick something, so when I would go into Blockbuster way back in the day, I would get a bunch of movies because I've never walked out of a movie, but I would take many out of the cassette and go, no, right? And I always joke, I loved when Netflix came along because I had enough late fees to make a Blockbuster movie.
Oh,
but
sure.
I might choose an old classic. I love Butch and Sundance, The Graduate, some of these really old movies. Or I'd choose a new feature and something that would really excite me and light me up. So it's that stop, drop, and roll, that old feeling, that the old PSA when you're on fire, when your nervous system's on fire, stop. Drop whatever you're thinking, focus on your breathing, just count your breathing, long, slow exhales until you bring yourself back in that present moment. And then you get to choose. You get to decide. Is it going to be a compelling vision of the future? Do you go back over your visualizations of getting over the green rail? Do you go back over your visualizations of standing on the podium? Do you go back until you feel it and you're in that feeling now and you got all those good neurochemicals? Or you can go back to the South Catholic game for me, right? And go back to that, going into the end zone 3 times and being interviewed after the game. And I don't typically use that now at my age, but if I was going to go all the way back to my high school career, right? But I can imagine a time when I was on stage and I just felt it, and I really had a good set, or I had a really great session with a client, or I just had a really magic moment. So we can use the past, but we want to be selective with it. We can use a compelling vision of the future, but we want to make sure we're controlling it and not going into old programming, because if we don't, our mind is a meaning-making machine. If we don't give it a meaning, it's going to go back in and it's going to look for meaning from something from our old programming, and it's often going to be something that don't serve us. So stop, drop, and roll, move into the present moment, count the breathing, and then you get to choose. Compelling vision of the future, the visualizations that you've been doing, right? And then your horse is going to feel that energy too.
And in our work with the hypnosis, we are able to help these individuals really learn how to reprogram those things. So some of those visions of the past, and they're no longer living within their cells. We've changed the chemistry, we've changed the thoughts so that the state does not rise up anymore. That anxious state or that state of fear is able to stay quiet.
I love that. I almost interrupted you. I apologize. So it's very natural for our mind to anchor to things. And so what we often do is give them a positive. The young kids today call it being triggered, right? Being triggered. Oh, yeah. So that can happen through smells, sounds, or just going back in old programming. And so what we want to do is give them a more powerful anchor. And we'll do this consciously. We'll do it in the hypnosis. And as we're anchoring in, so that when a stimulus happens, the old anchor of failure or tripping over the green rail is the example that we keep going back to, right? So what we're doing is, so it becomes automatic. It becomes who we are. Because our subconscious mind is our autopilot, right? And as we're making it more automatic, now when that stimulus comes up, we just rewired, chemically, and the neurons that wire together, we've changed that pathway. So now that new anchor comes up to how they want to feel versus how they felt in the past.
And that's what I think is just so important for these listeners to understand, how this powerful tool of hypnosis can create those new wires, and with new wiring we can create new realities,
new life, a whole new life. Yeah.
Change your mind, change your life, right?
Change your mind, change your life, right?
I know that we could probably sit here and talk about this forever, but if you were to leave these listeners with maybe just one or two takeaways that are really powerful, what would you have to say?
Then I would just say, because we did go through a few little techniques that I probably would put in there again, but instead of repeating them, it's just you get to choose, right? You get to be the creator of your reality versus the victim of your reality. And I think that's what we're moving all our athletes, our clients, is moving out of this whole world is happening to me and I have no control into you being the creator of a whole new reality, like we just said. And that you can do it, right? We have experienced it ourselves. We've experienced it through our clients. And it's just, okay, what do I want this to look like? And now let's reprogram that going forward. Again, all your programming up to that point until you realize this was done to you. Fair enough. Like, don't beat yourself up over it. It was done to you. But now, as you know, let's get into what it is and creating the life that you want. And everybody that I have worked with, they get the credit because they're doing the work. I'm doing the hypnosis, but they're really doing the work. And I've seen them create miracles in their life through just helping them and guiding them and doing the hypnosis with them to help them to reprogram their subconscious mind. Yeah.
A year of hard work that you put in for me, and here we are today.
Here we are today. And this has been amazing. Thank you for having me on.
I'm so grateful that you took some time with me today. How can our listeners get in contact with you?
Best way is just go to the website, The Mind on Purpose. It's www.themindonpurpose, spelled just like that. And, they can see just folks that I've worked with and some results that they've had and, testimonials, reviews, things like that. I keep it really simple, but that's a great way to reach out and, also kind of just see who I am.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, again, it was such a pleasure. This was so much fun. I'm sure it won't be the last one we do together. So
that would be great.
Can't wait. Again, thank you all for listening. This is Ride Recoded, a Mind Diva series, and we will all see you next time. Bye, Joe.
Bye.
Join us again for another inspiring edition of Ride Recoded, a Mind Diva podcast with Jessica Macris, helping riders unlock confidence, clarity, and conscious performance. Heard worldwide on the Equus Radio Network.